And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show. It is Tuesday, January 14th. I'm Josh Engleman here to break down a 7-game NBA slate today. 2 games at 7, a 7:30, 2 games at 8, a 9:30, and then a 10 o'clock late night hammer to the face Brooklyn Nets, Portland Trailblazers. Coming off yesterday's nice little 6-gamer on DraftKings. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Follow me at Josh Engleman on Twitter. You can see that handle, move this way, right under my chin. Perfect. What's up, everybody? Big old day out of Anthony Edwards yesterday. That looked pretty damn good. Tyler Hero with a monster. AD with a solid day, minus 21 in his time. Harden ended up getting there, which is kind of a bummer for me. Unsurprisingly, Amin Thompson continues to get there. That dude is just stacking up stat lines over and over again. Wemby was great. He was plus 26 in his minutes. Just didn't need as much firepower, unfortunately. What else happened? Kel'el Ware ended up being massive, 41 fantasy points in 32 minutes. Ended up getting a little bit more playing time than I was expecting. Still got to him, but not nearly as much as I would have. I gave him a slightly larger minutes bump. Vassell worked out well for me. Castle as a value option worked out pretty well. Thought I had an inside track. It all faded away, though, once my payups were a little lacking, and I had a bit more Wemby than I did Anthony Davis. But that's okay. We're back again today. You know who didn't help me out? Davion Mitchell, who I projected right and got the absolute nut low performance out of Mitchell. 9 fantasy points in 26 and a half minutes. Gross. Really unhelpful from old Davion yesterday. Loved the play. Just didn't get me where I needed to. Yeah, Steven, he had 6 and something right out of the gate. And then Gobert just sort of faded into the ether as Anthony Edwards started to go a little crazy. A good day, though. And now we've got no football and a 7-game NBA slate. So I'm pretty happy. Plus, Liverpool plays today. So I'm repping the brand. I got the hat on. Got the warm-up on. We're feeling good. So yeah, hit that like button if you haven't done it yet. Let's get this bad boy started. Do I need to get the Chris Boucher stuff out of the way now? Let's do it. So I played Chris Boucher last night. Chris Boucher, not an interesting play until we got the news that Emmanuel Quickley was going to be out. And then it started to get really scary. Did not play in the first quarter. Akbaji got in ahead of him, back into the rotation. Boucher was the last guy to enter in the rotation. Played 6.5 minutes or 7 minutes or something in the second quarter. Wasn't looking great. Came back in the third quarter late, and then played the entire fourth quarter, 7 of 8 from the field, 5 boards, an assist, and a block. Got everybody there in 21.5 minutes. John C., $3,300 center not starting, and we didn't get the news until the final 2 games were there. Like, do I wish I would have gotten a little bit more? Yeah, obviously. But I'm not surprised that the public didn't. AD in the late spot, Wemby in the late spot. It was hard. It was pretty hard to get to him. What did I end up with? I gave him 26 minutes, which ended up, I gave him 24 minutes, which ended up being a little light. Kind of frustrating. Probably should have expected a little bit more, but that's on me, I guess. Let's see. I had 12.5% of where he ended up 5. I would have liked to get a little bit more there. I did have 50% of Castle, who ended up being only 9% owned. That was probably the second best play that you could get to. And I had a lot. I ended up with 40% of Donovan Mitchell. I ended up with 40% of Mitchell, which went terribly, but should have gone so much better. Sizzle, that's bold, because you didn't really have any options to get off of that. Congrats, I guess. Congrats. Let's break this bad boy down, shall we? Cleveland Cavaliers, 7-point favorites in Indy, 230 total. Now, there is not a lot to like here on the Cleveland side, which is par for the course. Ty Jerome, doubtful again for this one. No one getting any real love from an ownership perspective. Max Strus, 8%. Everybody else is below that. I didn't get a single guy from Cleveland north of 10% optimal. These guys just don't play enough. Every one of these other teams has starters that are going to play 34, 35, 36 minutes. That ain't Cleveland. We're talking about 30 minutes a night for these guys, which I might add is one of the redeeming qualities that I think for Cleveland. I've been slow to get on the Cleveland bandwagon. I do think they're outstanding. I think this leap that Garland and Mobley are making are changing them. P. Wayne, yes, there was no reason to play Boucher. You clearly just didn't listen to everything I said, but go ahead and try to listen for the rest of the show. It'll help. With Mobley and Garland taking this leap, I'm interested in Cleveland. The really interesting part of Cleveland is they can scale up when they get to the playoffs. Because when we can start getting 36, 38, 40 minutes out of Mobley, 36, 38, 40 minutes out of Mitchell, out of Garland, 34 out of Jared Allen, concentrating that talent is going to be really, really helpful. So I'm anxious to see what they look like in the playoffs. Josh, Westbrook had another good game. All right, we'll do that too. Let's get this one out of the way, since people seem to think that that's a thing that matters. Yes, they are winning games. No disagreements. Are they doing it because of Russell Westbrook? Not really a ton of evidence to say that they are. Denver Nuggets. When Russell Westbrook is on the floor, the entire team is 5.8 points worse than when he's off the floor. They score 2 points less on offense. They give up 3.5 more points when he is on the floor. Neither one of those things are good. That's pretty awful. Russell Westbrook, Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic. That's the starting lineup. They've played 268 possessions together, plus 2.9. They are a 5th percentile defense. They are barely an above average unit. Need to stop giving Russell Westbrook all these flowers, folks. The flowers we need to give are just, that's how good Jokic is. He makes you guys think that Russell Westbrook is the answer to the question, when it is not the answer to the question. So for Cleveland, we'll cycle this one back. There's nothing here for Cleveland in terms of any sort of priority. The guy I like the most would be $8,300 Donovan Mitchell. But even like the most is relative. We're talking about a guy that's 2% owned, 9% optimal for me. Maybe you get to 5 to 10% of him. But I don't know. How do you prioritize Cleveland? How do you prioritize Cleveland? I just don't see it. Well, yeah, as a fantasy play, he's just whatever. I mean, his price is common. He's just every other guy. Yeah, I mean, on a fantasy point per minute basis, yes, Russell Westbrook is and has always been a solid fantasy play. If that's what we want to say, I can do that. But every sort of advanced metric is pointing him as like a dude. Now, Indy is a team we actually have to talk about. The Indiana Pacers are the most owned team on the slate today. Yo mama's fave. Isn't this a DFS show? It's whatever I want it to be, brother. It's whatever I want it to be. So it does not appear that we are going to have Tyrese Halliburton today. He is doubtful, left hamstring soreness. If the Pacers were smart, they would sit him down for 2 weeks and make sure that all this soreness starts to go away. We've been down this road before. Put him out. Oh my God, you're an idiot. So TJ McConnell's price is back up out of that 3K area, but he's also 35% owned. $4,700 point guard. Andrew Nembhard, 30% owned. $5,300 point guard, shooting guard eligible. Mathurin's 20. Siakam's 15. Miles Turner and Ben Shepherd, both 10% owned. My assumption for a starting lineup: Nembhard, Shepherd, Mathurin, Siakam, Turner. I assume we're going to get TJ McConnell playing somewhere in that like 22, 23 minute a game range. He looks awesome. Does he look 35% owned awesome? No, not to me. However, I figure he ends up in like that 25 to 30 range as more value comes out. And he's going to look great. He's an outstanding point per dollar play. We know what we're getting out of TJ. Happy to get him as a value option. If we're talking about who I think is the best option on Indy, that's going to be Benedict Mathurin. Mathurin's 5,800. He's shooting guard, small forward eligible. He's around a fantasy point per minute. And this is a dude that likes to get shots up. And he's not going to be short on the ability to get shots up with no Halliburton around. I like the price. I like the rates. I hate the matchup. But with no Halliburton and the best possible position eligibility, Mathurin looks like the guy that I would actually want the most. Nembhard steps into a much different role. He really changes up the way he looks from a point guard standpoint. We see assist rate bumps for Nembhard when there's no Halliburton out there. And I would imagine that Nembhard will not be sharing the floor with TJ McConnell all that much. That becomes a very different Andrew Nembhard. He looks great to me. I'm not surprised at all to see his 30% ownership. But Indy, this is where it's tricky because obviously this isn't a good spot against Cleveland. Defense is great. It's not a good matchup. But when you take off the best player on the Pacers and fill back in all of the shots, all of the usage, all of the assists, and all these guys are like slightly underpriced for it, it means that the Pacers become the most interesting team on the slate. But if I'm ranking the Indiana Pacers today, it would be Mathurin 1. It would be Nembhard 2, McConnell 3, Siakam, Shepherd, and then Turner. Shepherd, not the best per minute guy. 3,200 though. Shooting guard, small forward. He's a 0.65 guy, optimistically. Really doesn't get anything done. But 3,200, best possible flexibility. I get the idea of wanting to use him. He's easy to roster. Now, that is what we've got going on for Indy. Let's go to the next game, which is going to be the Oklahoma City Thunder. Thunder are 10.5 point favorites in Philadelphia, 218 total. Welcome back, Alex Caruso. Not on the injury report today. For the Philadelphia 76ers, no Drummond, no Embiid, no Lowry, no Martin, no McCain. Caleb Martin, though, questionable for this one. OKC is pulling a little bit of ownership here. Kind of scary. We're getting just shy of 20% to Lou Dort, 4,100, shooting guard, small forward. He's the most owned guy from the Thunder. He is the guy that showed up as the most optimal play for me. Great flexibility, great price. Not all that dissimilar. Slightly better per minute guy than someone like Ben Shepherd. Should play more minutes. Happy to get to Dort. Cason Wallace is the other guy that's getting any love for Oklahoma City. He's around 15% owned. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible, 4K. 10% optimal, 17% boom. You're looking for about 28 fantasy points out of Wallace. I'm at least a little nervous that Caruso is back. That's an easy way to eat a couple minutes out of Cason Wallace here. But he does look really good for 4K. I went 29 minutes. We are seeing very light ownership to Shea, to Jalen Williams, to Isaiah Hartenstein. They're all in that 5 to 10% range. That's kind of where I expect them to be. I don't have much interest in anything from the bench, whether that's, now that Caruso's back, whether that's Joe or Wiggins or Caruso. I think the focus for Oklahoma City today, unfortunately, is Dort and Wallace. And I don't necessarily want a ton of this. It's not like Dort is like, you're getting okay value on their lower dollar guys, but not anything where you feel awesome about it. But Dort and Wallace would be the priorities. I would say that Shea at 10,500 is a bit underowned at 4%. Just thinking about it here, for Cleveland, we don't really have value options. For Indy, we do have some pay down options. And then obviously we have guys like Wallace and Dort as potential value options just from OKC. So Shea feels a tad underowned to me. Now, we do have Jokic on this slate. We do have Giannis on this slate. So we do have some of the other major pay-ups. But I would argue that, and I know that Jokic and Giannis are both pulling pretty sizable chunks of ownership. So as I look at it here, Shea kind of feels like the GPP pivot in relationship to Jokic and Giannis. But we'll see how that looks as we make it go a little bit further. But coming out of OKC, the guys that look like they're going to have the most ownership will be Dort and Wallace. Now, on the Philly side, it's one dude and one dude only, but I would argue that this should look a little bit flatter. Now, Caleb Martin is questionable. That will have an impact on the rest of these bench guys. There's no ownership coming into a $9,600 maxi. I got a hard time wanting to go there if I could go to Shea. There's 20+% ownership coming into Paul George. Flat 8K. Shooting guard, small forward eligibility. He looked good. He's tied for the highest optimal. He's got the highest boom for anybody for me on Philly. But 23 feels a tad high. Maybe that 15 to 20 range makes a little bit more sense. But Paul George, very clearly the best option you could get here. And then I kind of like a 6% owned Kelly Oubre a little bit more than the public does. We're talking like 10 to 15%, but I think he slept on at 6. I think if Caleb Martin plays, you don't love it, but 2% is probably a hair too low given the amount of minutes that he does play. I don't have much interest in Yabu here. It would be Paul George, and it would be Oubre as a GPP sneak option. You're definitely not going to the bench unless we get some really wild news. And I just don't see the path to getting Maxey over Shea here. Well, Paul George, shooting guard, small forward eligible. Yeah, I could see why he's getting the ownership. He would be the priority from Philadelphia, at least as of right now, 9:19 a.m. You guys like anything here for OKC and Philly? Anything standing out to you guys? Because I don't think anybody really jumps off the page for the Thunder or the Sixers. And it's really kind of weird. Like, we've got ownership is really flat. We've got the Pacers breaking free. We've got the Hawks breaking free a little bit. Everybody else is kind of either low owned or it's like one guy that's pulling a chunk of it. Slim Lancaster says SGA. Coach Chris likes Hartenstein. 2 not reallys, which I think makes sense. Mama's Fave says is with me a little bit on the Oubre play, but yeah, it's just not that kind of game. So we go to game number 3. And that's going to be the Phoenix Suns. 4-point favorites in Atlanta, 235 total. This is the second highest total on the day. And this is the second most exposed game. But it's really just a small amount of guys getting this ownership. We have 25% ownership coming into Kevin Durant, 8 to Devin Booker. Now, I had Durant 14% optimal. I had Booker 10. I have their boom at 31 and 26. I would argue that Durant is a hair over-owned. I would argue that Devin Booker is a hair under-owned. If their ownership was like 20 and 12, I think that would make a lot of sense. 25 to 8, I think that's a little bit too much separation between Durant and Booker. Now, I do agree that Durant looks like the best option from Phoenix. But I'm kind of intrigued by a 9K Devin Booker being 8% owned. The only other option to me from Phoenix would be Oso Iguodala. Now, we are getting Mason Plumlee as the starter. He's playing around 20 minutes. Nurkic is not available here. I gave 24 to Iguodala. Now, he's like a 0.8 guy. He's power forward center eligible, 3,500, 15% owned. I got him 10% optimal. Only a 14% boom rate, which is kind of scary. But you're also only looking for about 26 fantasy points out of Iguodala. Seems reasonable here against Atlanta. So Durant and Oso Iguodala are the two guys that you would want to look at first. Booker, to me, looks like a little bit of an ownership pivot. And if you just simply wanted to go to Booker instead of Durant, I think that helps to make a slightly more unique option. Just in sports, I don't see Yabusele as anything interesting today for Philly. Just a guy. Just a guy. But Phoenix is Durant, Iguodala, and Booker. That's where we stand. Beal at 6,500, he is playing like 30 minutes a night, but you need 40 out of him. That is a very specific outcome coming off the bench. That's tough to want to get to. And then the rest of these guys, your Dunns, your Tyuses, your O'Neals, they're not good enough and they don't play enough. Now, the Atlanta side is a giant problem. So, Bogdanovic is questionable. Trae Young is questionable. Jalen Johnson, obviously, still out. Those Q tags are going to matter. And we don't know the status of the G League guys right now. Keaton Wallace and Daquan Plowden. But we are getting quite a bit of ownership here that I do not agree with. Yeah, Mitchell, I'm not entirely sure they're going to be able to address the Suns' need for centers. I guess the rumor is Nick Richards, which isn't really addressing anything. They can't address it because they don't have the ability to. We got 3 guys from Atlanta getting 20% ownership. The first is the guy I like the most out of it, and that would be Bogdanovic. Shooting guard, small forward eligible. He's 4,300. He's a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy. Clearly the best value option here. I have him 14% optimal, 22% chance of 30 fantasy points. And he's pulling 20% ownership. I think he deserves that. Now, Clint Capella is 4,900 center only. Onyeka Okongwu is 4,500 center only. Those guys are essentially going to split the center minutes. But they're both 20% owned already. Now, I don't expect them to maintain 20% ownership. I'm guessing it ends up being more in that 15 range. But right now, I think they're both over-owned. I don't know how you grab one without the other. They look very similar. I slightly prefer Capella, but ultimately, I think both of these guys are pulling a little bit too much ownership. I'm anxious to see if it comes down. Because I'm happy to have either Capella or Okongwu. But it's like a twofold answer. One, you got to get the right center. And then 2, you got to hope they're the guy that plays well, too. So I think they're both a tad over-owned for what we're getting. Vit Krejci's pulling around 15% ownership. He's 3,400. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible. He can play a little bit more, but he's going to be somewhere in that 24-minute range. Not the best per minute guy in the world. Decent enough value. I look at Trae Young at 10K and see him as like a pay up to be contrarian guy. He's 4% owned, 11% optimal, 30% chance of going for 56.5 fantasy points. If Trae's playing, I like him, but he's not going to be owned. He's going to look a lot like, getting to Shea as an ownership pivot in GPPs. Now, if Trae ends up out, we're going to look quite a bit differently at DeAndre Hunter. If Bogdan is in and Trae is out, Bogdan Bogdanovic is going to look way better. At that point, Vit Krejci is going to look way better. Risache probably looks a little bit better. So Trae being out will create more ownership to Atlanta by a lot because Trae is already not owned. And all that's going to do is redistribute 35 minutes, 30% usage, a 40% assist rate. All that's got to redistribute through the team. So we need to pay attention to Atlanta because that Trae and Bogdanovic news will really affect where the value is on today's slate. 3 games done. Moving pretty good here. Let's talk schedule for the rest of the day. And we will start that off very easily by hitting what we've got. Now, obviously, strategy show today. I'm on it. You're watching it. 10 a.m., Laffy and Ben will have the NFL strategy show. We'll have the NHL strategy show at 2. I will be back with DK at 5 o'clock for the deeper dive. Greg and Eric will be on Live Before Lock at 6. And then Greg and I will be on Playback tonight, playback.tv/Stokastic. We will be on Playback, watching games, talking ownership, late swaps, bets, all that stuff. Probably be watching Cleveland, Indy. Might be able to switch to Phoenix, Atlanta for a little bit, and then we'll be out of there at 8 o'clock. But we'll be able to set up all of our swaps through that 8 o'clock start. So I hope you guys can come and watch us. And if you can't, make it up for us by hitting the like button right now. The New Orleans Pelicans are 1.5 point dogs in Chicago, 240 total. This is the highest total on today's slate. This is the highest pace matchup on today's slate. But we are getting no ownership at all to either one of these teams. Do I think Hunter starts tonight? No. Why would he? He essentially hasn't started a game. I don't know why today would be the day that we would think he would start, but if Trae and Bogdanovic are out, then maybe. But there's absolutely no reason to suspect that DeAndre Hunter would be starting today. Yo, Mama's fave. Jalen Johnson has been out for weeks, essentially. Came back for 1 game. Other than that, has been out for ages. He's missed 4 out of the last 5. Missed the last 3. So I'm going to assume it's just like every other day where Hunter didn't start for him. That would be my guess. So for the Pels, only one guy is getting any sort of ownership. And even that's not that much. 12% to Yves Missi, 5,200, center only. Don't really see him as a priority. We're talking about a 10% guy. But that's how I see the rest of the Pels. They're all basically unowned. Now, DeJounte Murray at 8,300 on FanDuel is pulling a little bit of love, but, I got Murray 9% optimal. CJ 8, Zion 6, Trey Murphy 5. I don't want much from the Pelicans here. I'm okay getting some shares of Missi. I'm okay getting some shares of CJ or DeJounte. But I don't, from a priority standpoint, I don't know. I don't know where you go here. I would rank it Murray, Missi, McCollum, I guess Zion, Murphy, but when I don't get Tizzle, there's zero chance they're ever trading Murphy. That's the guy. That's one of the 2 guys they're going to keep no matter what. As they should. If you want to get to one of the starters, I don't think that's crazy. But if I can't get a guy over 10% optimal, I'm not going to be that interested. Yeah, Mitchell, I don't agree with you there. We've had 3 months of basketball. I think we could probably pump the brakes a little bit on him being an awful number 1 pick. The dude's 19. Gonna take some time. Yeah, I don't. You guys seem to like the Pels a little bit more than I do. I don't see the value here. 7,700 for Trey Murphy. He's a fantasy point per minute guy. That's a big price tag. CJ's a 1.1 guy. He's 7,500. It's hard to get to these Pels. Do I think that one of them will look good from the starting lineup? I do. I got 101% boom projected to these guys. One of those starters is going to be decent. But I think they all look the same, and that makes it really hard to prioritize one over the others. Now we go to Chicago. Chicago, a little complicated. Ayo Dosunmu, questionable for today. He has been out for a while. That will change things up. Also, Kobe White is questionable. So those two items will affect Chicago in a big way. Makes it so we can't really talk about them too much here. They're not getting any love. They're all sub 10% owned. I did get Patrick Williams and Zach LaVine to 10% optimal. I got Vooch, White, and Giddey just below that. I gave Dosunmu 22 minutes. I don't have a great feel there. We need to know these lineups. We need their updates as the day goes on. If they're both in, I don't really see the path to getting to much of Chicago here. LaVine would be the priority. A priority I'm using very loosely. Does he look good? Yeah. He's 8,600 now shooting guard small forward. That dude was like 6,800 earlier this season, if I remember correctly. That's a big price tag for Zach LaVine. Now, he's been playing outstanding. Dude's dropping buckets like it's nobody's business. He seems to be back to the guy offensively that we remember him being. Plus 3.1 offensive EPM, 65% true shooting, 45% from three. I like LaVine a lot, but the price tag is also showing how good he's been. T says, catching up on the show late, just watched the beginning, feel like the take on Westbrook might just be somehow helping synergy, even if the metrics don't show that. Yeah, I'm going to go with the metric that says that the team is 6 points worse every time he's on the floor. That would be the metric that I would look at. We got to stop thinking that wins and losses are predictive. They are binary. You either get a full win or a full loss with nothing in between. And if you run hot on a couple coin flips, the wins and losses become disproportionate. And people don't understand how to look at the rest of the data. When the rest of the data shows he's like a coin flip guy in the starting lineup, which is fine. That's great. He's miscast. But, we're talking about a guy that should be playing like 20 minutes a game from the bench. We need the news here. White, Dosunmu, those are both very important Q tags that we need. GK Scotty, Westbrook has been balling, Josh. No, not really. Not really. He's been himself. Nothing more, nothing less. Look, it's all Jokic. It's all Jokic. Nikola Jokic makes everybody look better. It's that easy. You want to know why Russell Westbrook's shooting 63% at the rim after 3 straight years of 57, 54, and 56? I'll give you a hint. It's because when Nikola Jokic holds the ball and people move around, people fuck up. And there's a lot of space to be found. And he gets an unabated path to the rim. And it's working. It's working. For sure. But this guy's a backup. He's 36 years old. We got to stop thinking it's anything other than that. The second unit is always going to look worse than the first. Yeah, and the first unit doesn't look that good, which I already talked about. Did Aaron Gordon get Wally pipped by Westbrook? Nope, sure didn't. He will get ripped out of that starting lineup in due time. Game number 5. Sacramento Kings. 2.5-point dogs in Milwaukee. 228 total. No ownership coming into Sacramento. Q tag on Malik Monk, but it's 9% ownership to Monk, 9 to Sabonis, 7 to DeRozan, 4 to Fox, 3 to Keegan Murray. There's nothing here. I would argue these guys look a little underowned, and they might look even better if Monk happens to sit. Because if he sits, Keon Ellis is going to become a guy. Kevin Huerter could potentially become a guy. But you want to tell me Monk should be 10 to 15% owned? I'd agree. You want to tell me DeRozan should be 10 to 15% owned? I agree. You want to tell me an $8,300 De'Aaron Fox should be more than 4% owned? I agree. You want to tell me Keegan Murray should be more than 3% owned? I agree. I kind of think Sacramento is the most underowned team of anybody we've talked about, and probably of any team we're going to talk about. I like Sacramento in GPPs across the board for their starting five. But Fox is too light. DeRozan's too light. You could argue Monk is slightly too light. I'll always be fine getting some Sabonis. And, Murray is always going to be a fine wild card. Yo, Mama's fave, we have lineup data, right? So we could look at it when Russ plays with those guys. We could look at it when Aaron Gordon plays with those guys. That data exists. We don't have to pretend like it doesn't. I read it off yesterday. I guess I'm going to have to read it off again. I don't know why we have to do this every day. At some point in time, I would assume people would start to learn things. It doesn't appear that that's the case, but I figure one day we'll get there. Let's do this one last time. Murray, Brown, Porter, Gordon, Jokic. The real starting lineup. Plus 8.2 in 460 possessions. Westbrook in that lineup in place of Gordon. Plus 2.9. More than 5 points per 100 possessions worse. It's right there. It's right there. I like Sacramento. Do you guys like Sacramento here as GPP options? Carmen, why do I keep wasting my time? My goal is to educate people. Whether that's in real basketball or in DFS, the goal is to educate. Some people take it on, and it clearly shows. Some people don't. Oh, no. It's not me taking the troll bait. I like doing it. That's the problem here. That's the real problem. I enjoy it too much. Yeah, it seems like everybody's on Fox in this spot. I'm going to go ahead and assume we see that De'Aaron Fox ownership come up. It just feels too low. 8,300, too cheap of a price tag for him right now. Now on the Bucks side, we got a Q tag on Gary Trent. No Chris Middleton for this one. Q tag also on Ryan Rollins. This is where we're starting to get the ownership here. 30+% to Giannis. 15 to Lillard. 15 to Portis. So 38 to Giannis is, what part of that is surprising? One, Sacramento doesn't have a single body that can slow him down. I think we could start there. This is a matchup nightmare for the Sacramento Kings. To me, there's no way to ignore how good of a matchup this is for Giannis. Who slows him down? I'd love to know it. Now, Sacramento allows the least amount of shots of any team at the rim. They're 19th in field goal percentage at the rim. Now, they could try to wall off the rim as much as they want. It's not going to happen for Giannis. Short mid-range, outside 4 feet, inside the free throw line, second to last. They're going to get the penetration. That's for sure. I love Giannis here. I'm happy to pay up for him. Whatever we can do here to get to Giannis, do it. Because he's great. 11-5, power forward center. Certainly a preferred option today. I would argue probably the best pay up option on the day. Black Thoughts, absolutely not. That will never happen. And I would never do that. I don't know what the big ticket, what's the big ticket? Whatever podcast you heard it on, that's a terrible trade. Paul, that's a wild take. Wild take. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. Truly an insane take. If you're trying to comp Luka and Russell Westbrook right now, that's gross. That's truthfully gross. But yeah, I'm not going to take KG's thoughts on trades because that would be a dreadful trade. Yeah. Anyway, Dame 15% owned, 10% optimal, 24% boom, trying to get to 50 fantasy points. Looks right to me. Not going to meet a lot of resistance in that De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk backcourt, that's for sure. And if Giannis can get himself into the paint, that's where I think it starts to look good because Sacramento is 27th in threes allowed and 26th in non-corner threes. So anything above the break. I think Giannis is going to be able to get himself into the paint. And I think the shooters for Milwaukee are going to benefit here. So I like Dame. I like Giannis. Portis is all right. 18% ownership for Portis seems a tad high, but I get it. Brook Lopez at least looks mildly sneaky at 5K. Yeah, Grizzly. Portis is not a sneaky pick. He's the second most owned guy on Milwaukee. He's 18% owned. You're not sneaking up on anybody with Portis, at least based on the ownership right now. So the three guys that I would have my eye on the most would be Giannis, Dame, and Portis. And I think Brook Lopez is at least a hair underrepresented. Just a hair. Stephen Burrell, is Middleton still bubble wrapped? He is just out today. Not even playing. Not even playing. Let's go to game 6. We're almost through this. We're moving pretty good. Denver Nuggets, 4-point favorites in Dallas. 231 total. For the Nugs, Aaron Gordon is probable. Jokic is probable. Murray is probable. Still no Luka on the Dallas side. Kyrie is questionable. Now, I don't expect Kyrie to be playing here. I have him in, and the line is Denver favored by 4 right now. With Kyrie in, I have it closer to neutral. So I am leaning Kyrie not playing, and I'm figuring he's back for the next one, but I do have him in. Now we're getting 20% ownership to Jokic. We're getting 20% ownership to Westbrook. We're getting 10 to Peyton Watson. So the 20% to Westbrook, the 20% to Jokic, clearly I don't need to dig into this one all that much. If I have to explain to you guys why Nikola Jokic is a good play against anybody, that's going to be a journey. 17% optimal, a 47% chance of scoring 67 fantasy points. I like Giannis more than I like Jokic. I'm happy to pay up for both of them. It's the reason we're seeing guys like Trey and Shea be as low owned as they are, because Jokic and Giannis just look that much better. That's all that there is to it. Jokic looks awesome. I think Russ looks really good too. 6,900. I went 31 minutes. The 1.17 fantasy point per minute guy. I had him 13% optimal, 28% chance at 42 fantasy points. I think 20% ownership for Westbrook makes a ton of sense in this spot. No problem whatsoever getting to him there, assuming he continues to start. So if at some point in time, Aaron Gordon is going to get back into the starting lineup, we're going to need to know that information. I don't expect it to be today. Once it happens, you got to run away from Murray. You got to run away from Westbrook. But for now, if he continues to start, he looks good. I would argue MPJ and Jamal Murray are both a hair under-owned in this matchup. Peyton Watson, I would argue, is probably a hair under-owned as well. 10% owned. He's 4K. He's power forward only. He's playing a ton. Now, I only gave him 28 minutes for Peyton Watson. He's a 0.8 guy. Somewhere in that 0.75 to 0.8 range. I have him with the second highest optimal rate and a 20% chance of scoring 28 fantasy points. If you get 30 out of Peyton Watson, you're in good shape. And the minutes appear to be there. I talked about this a lot earlier in the season, that I needed to see bigger minutes for Peyton Watson and bigger minutes for Julian Strawther. We're starting to get that now. Denver needed to figure out what their rotation could be when they get to the playoffs, and they need to figure out what that rotation is going to need if they can try and make any moves at the deadline. That's starting to happen now. Now, Strawther has been a massive negative. Peyton Watson, though, negative 3.6 is the differential for Peyton Watson at this point. I'm okay with that. Considering he's playing a large majority of his minutes with the bench units, Watson's looking a little bit better than Strawther here. So I like Peyton Watson as a value option, and I would argue 10% ownership for him is a little low. I would argue that Strawther at 3,500 shooting guard small forward is also a hair under-owned. I really like Denver here. I don't think they're getting nearly as much love as they should be. I think Jokic is right. I think Westbrook is right. I think Watson, Murray, and MPJ should all have a little bit more ownership. And I think Christian Brown and Julian Strawther are guys that you can get to. So I like Denver quite a bit more than the public appears to. And I don't really see any scenario where that's going to go away today. I don't expect Denver's ownership to move around much. I do like the idea of getting to more Denver for late swap purposes. Got a lot of options before this. This is the third highest total. It's the second highest pace. I actually have Denver more optimal than any other team on the slate. That includes Indy, who's pulling all the ownership. That includes Portland, who is the third most owned team. I have them more optimal than Atlanta. I think Denver's getting slept on today. And I think Denver is the team that you want to focus on, particularly if Kyrie Irving ends up out. Now, if Kyrie is in, that makes it very difficult to get to Dallas. Kyrie's 9,300. We are not going to be going to Kyrie in his return today. That's going to feel tough to do, especially when you've got guys out there like Maxey, like Shea. The guards for Cleveland, Devin Booker. A lot of guys out there not pulling much ownership in this range. So it's not going to be Kyrie if he's in. I didn't get anybody north of 10% optimal. Najee Marshall will look okay. Derek Lively will look okay. But if Kyrie is in, I don't really see the path to getting to much of Dallas. Now, if he's out, we're probably not getting a ton of Dallas. They'll just look a little bit better. Marshall will maintain his ownership. Lively will maintain his ownership. PJ Washington and Klay Thompson will both look a little bit better. Dinwiddie and Grimes get a slight bump. But these guys' prices are now up from those guys being out. So I'm not seeing Dallas being a priority today. Paul, what's your argument here? Because you seem to be arguing for a lot of what Russell Westbrook did like 8 years ago, which is super not relevant any longer. Do you guys like anything here for Dallas? Yeah, like Slim Lancaster says if Kyrie is out, Grimes will look better. Yeah, but like he's already 5,400. Like even if you want to give him 30 minutes, like he needs every bit of that. You're never giving him 30 minutes. But if you get him up to 28, yeah, he'll be like a solid 10%er. But I don't think that we're prioritizing anything from Dallas, even if Kyrie is out. It's interesting, though. Yeah, Noel, I'm with you. Like Lively looks good at 5,800. But to me, he just sort of looks like a guy. Nothing crazy. And arguably slightly overowned. That's 6 games. We are on to the final game of the night. This is the late night hammer to the ding dong, guys. Hit that like button if you haven't done it yet. Make sure you're signing up at Stokastic too. Link in the description. You can sign up through one of our partners and get a month of NBA Sims for free. Instructions are going to be in that link. All right, so Brooklyn, we essentially can't talk about Brooklyn. Nick Claxton's questionable, Cam Johnson's questionable, D'Angelo Russell's questionable, and Ben Simmons is questionable. There's still no Cam Thomas, Watford, Melton, Lewis. I mean, we're talking about probably their 4 best players, Cam Johnson, Claxton, Russell, and Simmons. That's 109 minutes. 109 minutes. That's an interesting group of 3 people. People demanded to leave LeBron when he was in Cleveland. Wade, who was already dead. Derrick Rose, who was long since dead. And Iman Shumpert, who I'm going to go out on a limb and say nobody was going to assume that name showed up in chat today. That's an interesting run out there, Paul. Wade, miles past his prime. Rose, in the grave. Iman Shumpert. Those are 3 names right there. That's special. That's truly special. I would love to break down Brooklyn here a little bit more. I don't know how we do it. I'll say this. If D'Angelo Russell is in, he's going to be the best guy here. If Cam Johnson is in, he's probably going to be hard to get to. I don't know how we talk about Brooklyn right now. The whole team might as well be questionable. So we're going to need that to hash itself out. We're going to need, hopefully we get a little bit of news throughout the day. Christian, you and me are on the same NBA path, man. We got it all. We grew up as like 7-year-olds thinking Michael Jordan was insane. Then he came back again and then he was like the dude. And then we got Bron just as we came out of high school. Love it, Christian. Love it. So I'm going to just skip out on the rest of Brooklyn here. I don't see how we do it. Now, Portland, kind of tricky too. Jeremy Grant still out with his face. Denny's questionable. Delano Banton is questionable. Time Lord is questionable. Coach Chris, I got you beat. I will be 40 in just under a month, February 12th. Mitchell, yeah, Simmons might triple-double if he plays. He's already questionable. Now, the Portland side of this one looks a little bit easier to get to. 13% ownership to Shaedon Sharpe. 14 to Anthony Simons. 13 to Avdia. 13 to Ayton. 15 to Scoot. All 5 guys there, or all 6 guys that I just mentioned, are at least 9% optimal. Sharpe's 11. Simons is 15. Kamara's 11. Avi is just shy of 10. Scoot's 10. Ayton's 14. All those guys should be like 10 to 15% owned. Completely agree with it. I kind of like Simons and Ayton the most, but not in any sort of like, you should prioritize these guys. I just think that you should be getting to a bunch of Portland. Not to mention, this really helps you out for late swaps. And it could look even better if Denny happens to be out. So, I'm very happy getting to a lot of Portland. 1, because of the late start time, and 2, because those top 6 guys just look pretty damn good. All of them should be in 10 to 15% of lineups. Like, I have Denver and Portland essentially the same optimal rate. And that's kind of how I feel about both of these teams, especially for the late games. If you could stack up a chunk of ownership on Denver and a stack of ownership on Portland, I think that'll really help to make moves to get to Brooklyn and Dallas when things break. So I like Denver and Portland on the late side of this one to try and make your life a little bit easier. If we want to look at my top plays for today, I've already posted these to Twitter. We've got Jokic at the top. We've got Giannis second. They might as well be the same. Benedict Mathurin, 3rd. Simons, 4. Kevin Durant, 5. DeAndre Ayton, 6. Westbrook, 7. Peyton Watson, 8. Keep an eye there. Paul George, 9. And Pascal Siakam, 10. But remember, we would only expect 1.5 of these guys to be in the optimal lineup. We would expect 3 of these 10 guys to be relevant plays at the end of the night. That's why this is hard, because I could recommend 10 guys. I can give you guys the 10 guys I think are the best options for today. And only 3 of those guys are likely to work out. You get 4, you're going to have a good day. You get 5, there's a decent chance you're in the top section of that contest and you're going to have a shot at something. But 3 is the likelihood. That's why NBA DFS is so hard. But that's going to conclude talking NBA DFS on this strategy show for Tuesday, January 14th. The NFL strategy show is coming up next. You're getting Ben and Laffy. They are breaking down this weekend's games. Divisional playoffs, right? Second round of the NFL playoffs coming up on Saturday and Sunday. You do not want to miss it. Coach Chris, I don't think that Ayton is going to smash. I don't. You're reading into that wrong. 14% optimal, 30% chance at 38 fantasy points. I think he's properly owned at like 13%. Nothing more, nothing less. But the public's getting there a little bit too. Thank you guys for being here. Go Liverpool. Revenge time. Sorry, Nottingham Forest. It's not going to be your day today. We're not walking alone. I'll see you guys for the deeper dive later tonight.